Okay. It is extremely windy here in Cortez today.
Really? Are you
Yeah.
getting any rain down there?
We're supposed to get snow this weekend.
Yeah, we've already had some. I was just up in Ogden this morning giving another lecture. So
Oh
uh
wow.
and they were
Busy
getting
day.
yeah, I've been all over the place. But yeah, they were getting snow up there, so
Wow.
it's coming.
Yeah.
But you're probably pretty warm still. Are you was it 70, 80 down there?
Yeah, it's in the 70s today, or
70.
maybe it dipped to the upper 60s, but yeah,
Uh,
it's gonna. I was very much looking forward to riding my bike this weekend, but it's not in the cards, I don't think.
oh no. Do
So
you mountain bike or road bike?
just just road right
Yeah,
now. It's
that's
pretty
I do the same.
nice. Very
Yeah.
cool.
What kind of bike do you ride?
I just got in November a Surly preamble. So I've been doing gravel. My house is in like gravel roads,
Oh
pretty
yeah.
serious gravel roads. But then I get to the road and do the road a little bit. So I wanted kind of a hybrid bike.
Oh man, I you know what they say, it's N plus one on bikes. It's just what's the next one, you know?
That's right.
So
I gave myself a year. I was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
can't find
Yeah.
another one.
That's cool. I got to get a gravel bike.
Do you think we're ready? Not yet.
It looks like we're right at time, actually. You were right on
Oh,
the dot on that one. So I
oh,
think we're good to get started.
great. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to leap right in with a short introduction, and then I will introduce our speaker. Um, so, if you don't know much about our organization, we are Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. We are a nonprofit research and education center in Southwest Colorado, which is near Mesa Verde National Park. If you want to find out more about our organization, it's crowcanyon.org. Some other information here on this slide if you would like to jot it down. I know that a lot of us are old hands at the whole Zooming thing, especially if you've been coming to the webinar series, but I just want to make sure to hit a couple highlights here. If you've got any questions, and I hope you do, you be sure to put them in the Q&A. Don't put them in the chat. I'm going to say it for the people in the back. Don't put it in the chat. Put it in the Q&A. If you're having any difficulty with Zoom, we are also live on Facebook. And we also have recordings on our YouTube channel too, so you can always check that and see if we've got this talk posted. Just want to start with an acknowledgement. Crow Canyon Archaeological Center acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Jicarilla Apache, people on whose traditional homelands our campus sits. With the work we are doing at Crow Canyon, we seek to bring light into the darkness of memory that these lands, waters, wildlife, and her descendants hold as a result of policies of removal, genocide, and displacement. We seek paths that support and align with Indigenous people and communities. With gratitude, we honor the contributions of present-day Indigenous communities, descendants, and colleagues with whom we partner, who have helped guide our work and our mission. Just a little bit of kind of some housekeeping things. If you don't know, the Society for American Archaeology, lovingly referred to as the SAAs, the Society for Archaeology meetings, American Archaeology meetings are next week. And we are actually going to be off of our webinar series next week because of this. And they're going to be held in Denver. And we've got a lot of people at Crow Canyon that are giving some awesome presentations. If you'd like to see more of what we're doing at the SAAs, you can go ahead and scan this QR code right now, and you'll go to a list of the kind of things that we're working on. And I'll keep it here just for a beat if anyone is really interested, and we're gone. Also, our spring newsletter. If you'd like to know what's happening here at Crow Canyon, maybe get involved, check it out. It's here. You can scan this QR code. Gonna keep it here for a beat, a little bit of a beat, and we're gone. Now, our upcoming webinar events. So not next week, but after that, we have a talk by Autumn Gillard. And then the following week, we have a talk by Keisha Supernant. And so check those out. Be sure to check those out. And then if you are so interested in supporting our mission and donating to Crow Canyon, please be sure to scan this QR code and you can go right there on our website. And I'll definitely keep it here for more than a beat, a little more than a beat. And now we're going to introduce our speaker today, Scott Ure. Scott is a native of Northwest Colorado and still enjoys exploring the high alpine lakes, often with a backpack and fly rod in hand. He and his wife, Ann, live in Springville, Utah, where their son, Ethan, attends BYU as a freshman. Scott is an associate teaching professor in BYU's anthropology department. He specializes in digital archaeology, focusing on the Fremont archaeological culture in the Eastern Great Basin. With over 20 years of archaeological experience, Scott has worked on projects across the Americas and Middle East. While his primary interests lie in Fremont ceramics and architecture, Scott is a strong advocate of technological advancements in archaeology. He effectively integrates drones, remote sensing, and GIS into his fieldwork and research methodologies. So I hope you will join us in welcoming Scott Ure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me bring up, am I good to switch over now here?
Yep.
Okay, give me just a second. Share my screen. Hey, how are we looking all right?
It's
Coming
coming
through
through.
clear.
Yep. Feel good.
Hey, cool. Well, thank you for that introduction. It's always weird to hear yourself introduced like that, but I appreciate the kind words, and shout out to some of my friends out there. Also my Colorado friends. I saw some Fort Collins and others. I grew up in Loveland, so I'm excited to be here today to share some of my research on Fremont red on gray pottery with you. Let's advance to the next slide. I really like, there's a quote from an individual, an archaeologist named Matthew Johnson, who's at Northwestern University. And he, there we go. He said, quote, "Archaeology is fundamentally about human beings. It is nothing if not anthropological, and that archaeology must explain, it must ask why questions before we can do more than just describe and classify." So today I hope to talk about some of those why questions when it comes to Fremont red on gray pottery. The outline that I'm going to follow here today is first just briefly introduce the Fremont archaeological culture as we understand them as archaeologists. I want to share some research questions about the unique nature of Fremont red on gray pottery. We'll get into some of the details on that and why it is unique. And then I'll propose some hypotheses, some theories as to why it's really quite different from other Fremont painted pottery that we find throughout the Fremont region. And I'll conclude then with some reasons why there are differences that are important to Fremont studies in general. So that's where we're headed. So the Fremont, I love this. This is a beautiful corrugated jar with some just incredible incising and decoration on it. If we look at the time frame of the Fremont, you can see on this slide kind of the different time frames in the Fremont land right here in kind of between the archaic and the late prehistoric in terms of archaeological time reckoning. If we look at some of the details then of the Fremont, they were by definition, horticulturalists in the Eastern Great Basin, as well as in the Colorado Plateau. The time frame that we look at is around 400 to 1300, give or take. We kind of quibble back and forth on those dates, but roughly 400 to 1300 AD. We think that they likely migrated from the American Southwest about 2,000 years ago. There's other theories as to the origins of the Fremont, if you will, but that's one of the kind of the main thoughts, is that they came from the Southwest up into this area. It's really unclear what happened to them, at least archaeologically, post AD 1300. There's no written language, and we're not really aware of Fremont belief systems or social organization. And for the most part, compared especially to the American Southwest, there's really very little archaeological footprint when it comes to the Fremont. When you visit a Fremont site, it's funny sometimes because you'll show people this is where the site is and it's just this field, right? And nobody really can see. We don't have a lot of the cliff dwellings or other things that you would see down in the American Southwest. So minimal footprint when it comes to Fremont sites. In terms of kind of the subsistence settlement and artifacts, the subsistence is primarily based on what we see in other areas prehistorically in the Intermountain West. So maize, beans, squash, as well as hunting and gathering. So supplementing diets with wild game of different kinds, deer, small game, rabbits and small rodents, and fishing as well, especially up in Utah Valley up here around the lakes and rivers. A lot of fishing was happening. Most of the villages, as you can see on this map shows kind of the major Fremont habitation sites that we're aware of. They're mostly found along the Wasatch Front, the Uinta Basin, and the Colorado Plateau, and typically in these kind of well-watered valleys. Along rivers, of course, access to water would be important. We do know that there are traces of the Fremont out into Nevada and Wyoming and up into northwestern Colorado. But most of these are artifacts and not really, there are a few kind of scattered sites, but nothing quite like the core areas that we find along the Wasatch Front and the Colorado Plateau. In terms of artifacts, I'm just covering these briefly, but most of the pottery is quite plain and quintessentially gray. This is the classic Fremont pottery. It's gray, typically fired in a reduction environment to give us that gray look, so not a lot of oxidizing. And we also don't have, it's mostly black on gray and black on white painted varieties. In terms of other artifacts that are unique to the Fremont, the basketry is quite unique, using a single rod style. Some unique rock art as well, and then the moccasins are quite distinctive, and I'll show you some pictures of these. So in terms of the basketry, you can see this is a really amazing cradle board with figurine. I think this is from the Pectel Lee collection. And then the classic Fremont moccasin with the dew claw from the hock of the deer leg. This is at the Peabody Museum at Harvard. Very, very different from the sandals and other woven shoes that you find in the Southwest specifically. And one of the more famous assemblages are the Pillings figurines. These are some of the more kind of grand and elaborate examples of Fremont figurines. These actually are really interesting because they show us potentially some of the concepts of adornment and clothing that may have existed among the Fremont in terms of necklaces and belts and skirts or kilts. But also we can see gender differences here with ear bobs and spools and earrings. What's interesting is a lot of these items we find archaeologically in terms of the jewelry that you're seeing on these Pillings figurines in the forms of olivella shell and pendants of turquoise. And I'll show you some pictures and you'll see that they look very similar to what you're seeing in these figurines. Other artifacts are, this is one of my favorite. This is a pendant found at Baker Village, which is right on the Nevada-Utah border. It's an owl shape, and birds are an interesting icon in Fremont artifacts and rock art. And in this case, this is, some kind of a pendant, perhaps. Not really sure actually how that's suspended given the drill holes on it. But a beautiful piece made out of slate. Going with the owl theme, here's an amazing rock art panel showing multiple owls, probably great horned owls, which are native to the area, as well as other animals, bighorn sheep, probably a bear claw, and human beings depicted on this panel, as well as some elk and others. Very classic Fremont rock art. Here's another one you've probably seen at some point. It's all over the internet. This is a rock art panel at Dinosaur National Monument. Classic Fremont with the headdresses and various elements held in the hands. Yeah, I love the Fremont rock art and some beautiful examples up into 9 Mile Canyon and all throughout Utah. In terms of architecture, when it comes to the Fremont, we have a lot of varieties. Early architecture was round pit houses that eventually developed into more kind of sub-rectangular pit houses. Then eventually in the late Fremont, we get something similar to what you see here with the Paraguna site. So this is one of the larger sites in the Fremont world. We start to see above ground architecture, including room blocks and storage structures, but you can also see some circular pit houses as well. So just a kind of a feel for what late Fremont architecture would look like. In terms of communal structures, this was an area that I've studied as well. And this is just kind of an example of some of these, what we think of as integrative or community buildings where people could have gathered together. These would have been large surface structures where different groups, theoretically, maybe men's groups or women's groups or entire communities in some cases could have gathered and met. They were large enough that it required groups bigger than a family to construct and maintain. So I think these were some kind of integrative architecture for the Fremont. What's interesting is the Fremont we never see any kind of kiva or associated rituals associated with kivas like we do in the Southwest. But perhaps this is something similar. I just kind of throw that out there as a theory. It's just something related to Fremont integration and community efforts. In terms of the pottery, as I mentioned before, here's just a couple examples of the painted varieties. These are what we call Snake Valley black on gray and Ivy Creek black on white. These are the only two painted varieties, aside from a couple others that, as I'm going to talk about today, is some red on gray. But this is by far the majority of the painted ceramics we find with the Fremont. So this is got some black on gray and then some black on white examples. But again, these are all graywares. They're all fired in reduction environments. And that's kind of the quintessential element to Fremont pottery, which brings up my slide on Fremont pottery. Pretty clear that these designs have origins in the American Southwest. But there's I don't know, the Fremont have kind of a subtle flair of their own, I think, and there's consistency in the design elements that they use and the techniques that are involved. We don't see any of the red wares or orange wares or polychromes that you would see down in the Southwest. So there's kind of this just subtle difference between Fremont painted pottery and what we find in the Four Corners area. And what's interesting is it's very consistent over quite a long period of time with not a lot of change. Maybe a little tweaks here and there, but fairly consistent overall. When we look at the production areas of these the painted pottery. It's found throughout all of the Fremont area. So we have these four what we call macro regions: the southern, central, northern, and eastern. And this painted pottery is traded throughout all of those macro regions. It's found at campsites and procurement areas. The Snake Valley black on gray pottery that I was showing you in the previous slide is produced mostly in the Parowan Valley in that southern macro region and traded throughout. The Ivy Creek black on white is produced mostly in the Emory area around, well, just east of the Sevier Valley. These are the two, like I mentioned, the two most commonly found painted types throughout Utah and widely traded, all up and down the Wasatch Front out into the Uinta Basin and other areas as well. But as I mentioned, there are a few lesser known painted types. And of course, that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is one of these rare painted types that's actually a little more common than we realized. So today, I'm going to talk about Fremont red on gray pottery. This is a rare type. It's been noted in the past in previous research, but it's largely understudied, probably due to the previously small numbers of red on gray pottery that have been found. I think in part because this paint is often fragile and faded. It's hard to see in a pile of hundreds of sherds. But as we've looked closer at these and looked at some of the collections, we've noticed more and more of this red on gray pottery, and it's more widely spread than we realized. The majority is found up here in northern Utah, around Utah Valley. And so as we looked through these collections, and one of my research colleagues, Joseph Bryce, did a lot of this research and going through museum collections. It prompted our reevaluation of this red on gray pottery. And for us, we wanted to know, why is it so different? It seems to really deviate from these strong traditions of the Snake Valley black on gray and Ivy Creek black on white pottery. We kind of were thinking that it might be a northern painting tradition that really kind of diverged from this strong black on white and black on gray pattern found in the South. So we suggest that this red on gray pottery may actually represent some kind of expression of identity that's intentionally diverging from these prevailing norms and structures of the Parowan Valley and the Emory region. And so I'll go in and explain some of the reasons why we think that might be the case. If we look at previous research, as I mentioned, it has been reported in the past in a few academic publications, one by Rex Madsen in 1977 and another by David Madsen in 1986. They're not related, by the way. And others have noticed some as well. More recently, Chris Watkins recommended that red and gray should probably be added to all Fremont temper types, given that it's more widely found. And we agree that that is the case as we've looked at more and more of this red on gray pottery. We're finding it in all of the different temper types throughout the Fremont region. In our research, we looked at sites all the way up and down the Wasatch Front across Utah. A total of 43 sites in our study, starting with the Knoll site all the way up in the north, up in the Ogden area, all the way down to Median Village, which is found down in the Parowan Valley area. If we look at the numbers, so some of the statistics, in terms of the percentages of red on gray by temper type. So on these graphs, we have a couple of different temper types. The Great Salt Lake temper type is made up here in the north, obviously around Utah Lake and the Great Salt Lake. And by far, the most red on gray is found in that Great Salt Lake temper type. We also have seen some in the Sevier, Snake Valley, Emory, Uinta, and a smattering of some of the others. But by far, the counts and percentages of red on gray is here in the north. So that starts to give us some clues about this red on gray pottery in terms of its possible production area. When we look at it spatially, in terms of a heat map. So it's very concentrated on sites in the southern portion of Utah Valley. So this is south of Provo, if you're familiar with this area, right around the southern end of Utah Lake. It's really not distributed very widely anywhere else. And so this is also interesting to us in terms of understanding what this means. When we look at the ratio of red on gray pottery to total assemblages across multiple sites, we also see this pattern playing out. A site that's located in southern Utah Valley along that southern edge of Utah Lake is the site of Wolf Village. And it by far had the highest ratio of red on gray pottery to total ceramics. Almost 2% of that assemblage is red on gray pottery. There are a couple other sites, but you can see that the majority of these, with these higher ratios of red on gray, are in northern Utah. There's a few that continue into the south and central regions, but by far it's a northern pattern that we're seeing. So when we look at kind of in detail red on gray pottery, there's a couple examples you'll see on the slides here. What's interesting that it's applied almost exclusively to jars and pitchers. So this is very different from the black on gray and black on white pottery, which is primarily applied to bowls, almost exclusively bowls. Whereas in this case, we're looking at the exact opposite situation. Almost no bowls are red on gray. There's also a high degree of variation in color in terms of the red, as well as craftsmanship. Not quite as finely crafted as the black painted bowls. The design elements and execution tend to be not as crisp and concise. The line widths vary quite a bit. And as I mentioned, it's found throughout all these temper types, but it's primarily what we call this Great Salt Lake variety up here in the north, in the Utah Valley and Salt Lake Valley areas. So just a couple examples. So if we look at some sherds, you can see these are some red on gray varieties from that Wolf Village site, which I mentioned, which had that highest ratio of 2% red on gray pottery. You'll see some of these elements. A lot of parallel or single lines, kind of wide widths, and brush strokes are quite loose. Not a lot of crisp edges to them. Most of these, as I mentioned, were fired in a reduction environment, so very little oxygen could get in, so they were probably buried and fired, which gives it that quintessential Fremont gray look. However, what's interesting is there are some sherds, and I'll show you an example here, of more of kind of a tan or almost a buff variety, kind of a red on buff or red on tan. And I throw that out there loosely. Most Fremont ceramicists would probably gasp if they heard me say this, but I kind of wonder if this is a different firing technique. Not only is the painting technique different, but potentially an oxidized environment used to fire this pottery, something we're looking at as well. But here's just some more examples showing some of these red parallel lines, really strong red lines, some geometry in these designs, but not nearly what you would see and have seen in those black on gray and black on white examples. And just some more of these kind of more tan varieties. These are from Wolf Village. Just showing some of the painting techniques and brush strokes on these sherds. There's a couple unique examples. One is a bird effigy jar. This was found at the Paraguna site down in southern Utah in the Paraguna or Parowan Valley. Really unique and sized vessel with red paint applied to it. And then another bird effigy jar, the only two that we know of in the Fremont world, or at least that I'm aware of, also painted with red. It's a little bit darker red. This is from Snake Rock Village. You can see the face and eyes on this vessel. Some beautiful examples of bird effigies. So in terms of the design analysis, we based this on Katie Richards' work from 2014, examining the black painted Fremont bowls in terms of their motifs and iconography. We note that there aren't any reconstructed vessels that we're aware of. And so all of this was based on sherds, which has its limitations, and we recognize that. So it was difficult for us to look at any terms of, or any elements of layout or symmetry. So we mostly looked at the presence or absence of design elements on sherds. As I mentioned before, we're noting in these design that there's kind of a varying painting techniques in terms of execution. So even in this example on this sherd on this slide, you can see kind of some loose edges and not very crisp, just kind of broad strokes, and sometimes only one stroke, or uneven and very limited in terms of patterning. When we look at the statistics of these design elements and compare it to the painted bowls, the black on grays and the black on whites, there's also kind of a stark difference. And so the red bars here show the design elements used for the red on gray jars and pitchers, primarily triangles and curved lines or single lines. But you'll notice the gap in terms of the design elements used on the black on gray and black on white bowls. So again, kind of another stark difference between the red on gray and the black painted examples. So as I mentioned before, the painted bowls are produced in the southern and central regions. We're pretty sure, based on the data, that the red on gray is likely produced in Utah Valley. In terms of trade, as I mentioned before, these bowls are traded widely throughout the Fremont world. But this red on gray pottery is not. It seems to be staying pretty tightly in the northern macro region. And it doesn't have kind of the polish and the I guess the refinement, if you will, of the painted bowls. So when we look at these bowls in a little more detail, we can see some examples of the differences in how they were made. So the consistency and the execution, the crisp lines, the line widths stay pretty tightly the same. It's common to see triangles and interlocking scrolls or stepped elements. There's other presence of dots and diamonds, as Katie Richards noted in her work, boxes and checkerboards, and a few examples of anthropomorphs and zoomorphs on these bowls as well. A lot of obvious planned layouts with bands and panels and some symmetries of different kinds, including rotational symmetry, which is common on these bowls. So I hope you're seeing kind of the differences between those, or between these and the red on gray examples I've been showing you. If we zero in then on the differences, here are a couple things to look at. So the most obvious is red paint instead of black paint. That's a kind of an obvious one that jumps out. As I mentioned as well, the red on gray is mostly painted on jars and pitchers and less than 1% on bowls. Whereas in contrast, the Snake Valley black on gray and Ivy Creek black on white bowls are mostly bowls. Non-bowls represent less than 1% in terms of painted examples. When we look at the line elements, painted lines are 2 millimeters thicker on red on gray compared to the black on white and black on gray. And as I've mentioned before, with the red on gray examples, the lines are just kind of uneven and not as well painted as we see with these bowls. As I noted as well, the red on gray is primarily in the north, whereas the black on gray and black on white are in the south. And we're not seeing the red on gray traded as widely as the others. And just to kind of reiterate, if we look at this difference between the design elements, we can see that there's almost no examples of red on gray having dots or terrace designs or boxes, diamonds, zigzags, all these other design elements you see at the painted bowls is not found in any of the red on gray examples. So there's just some interesting differences between these that are kind of stark in some cases. So for us, the question is why? Why are these so different? Why did the potters in the north deviate from kind of these long-standing traditions that were found in the south? Now, I can't really provide any like empirical data here to substantiate some of these theories that I'm going to provide, but I think they're plausible theories that I'm going to kind of wrap up with here. So the first is the notion of creative innovation, and I'll get into that here in the next slide. But another is potentially the meaning or the significance of the color red, and what could that potentially play in explaining the differences between these painted types. And then finally, could this red on gray that's really zeroed in on this northern macro region of the Fremont world be some kind of expression of group membership or even social identity? Again, these are theoretical and difficult to prove. And I don't know that we could ever really prove any of these theories, but I'll lay out some ideas and see what you think. So in terms of creative innovation, when we look at the notion of innovation in general, it typically is used to differentiate from kind of the norms or the current trends. And it's also sometimes used to create personal identities. People can kind of build themselves around a new trend to resist, the social norms and structures that might be prominent around them. Sometimes it's driven by socioeconomic reasons. So what's the next new thing out there? Like who's going to buy the next iPhone? Because everybody's buying the next iPhone, right? I have a Google phone, so there you go. I'm being different. Sometimes, though, creative innovation can be a way to maintain knowledge or even secret knowledge of some kind, or transmit that to certain people. But it's also interesting that sometimes innovation flourishes outside of core areas, so in peripheral locations, away from kind of urban areas or kind of core zones. In terms of ethnographic studies related to innovation, there are a couple. So Patricia Crown's work in 2016 looked at some notions of innovation that I apply here loosely to this red on gray study. Some of the ideas in terms of the American Southwest was that colors and designs can be dangerous and even forbidden to some people who are not initiated or have the authority to use those colors. In some cases, design elements and colors can be intellectual property of a type and shouldn't be used or replicated by others and solely to a certain individual or artist of some kind. Sometimes potters also, according to Crown, keep their colors and designs, their clay sources, and other rituals associated with these secret from outsiders, so that people aren't part of, the people who aren't part of that don't have access to that information. But some potters also will build their identities around their unique style and skill to produce that pottery, to innovate and make something different. So how does this apply to the red on gray pottery? Well, we noticed that in terms of interpreting this, the black painted bowls are widely traded throughout the Fremont region, and were probably made specifically for that reason, for trade, economic reasons. It's possible that those who made red and gray pottery up here in the northern region were trying to avoid deliberately competing with this well-established trade network, which, as I noted, is widely traded throughout the Fremont region. But they may have also been trying to come up with their own economy around the red and gray pottery. Again, these are all theoretical and kind of some ideas and hypotheses to test. But they also could have been avoiding infringing on intellectual property or some kind of negative consequences related to using designs or techniques that weren't theirs, that could have been specific to the potters in these more well-established villages in the Parowan Valley and the Sevier Valley that had, pretty significant influence throughout the Fremont region. And they established these really pretty solid trade networks that probably required a lot of management and agreements, contacts with influential leaders. And so perhaps the red and gray potters were not wanting to infringe on or break into that possible trade network related to the black on gray and black on white pottery network. Just some ideas is trying to explain the differences. So the next theory is the notion of the color and the significance of color. And color is important in a lot of cultures, but if we look at, especially among the American Southwest and ethnographic accounts of color, it was integral and is today for many groups to, it's integral to their physical world and their spiritual lives. It can symbolize direction and affiliation, is associated with curing and weather and lore. And so color is a really important part of understanding the world. It can be often associated, and as you see on this diagram, with cardinal direction. And specifically, the color red is connected with the direction of the south for many groups, but also is connected to plants and animals and other natural phenomena. Among the Hopi, for example, red is associated with men, hunting, the earth, blood, epidemic, starvation, hail, lots of different elements. And for the Navajo, red can often symbolize concepts of protection. These are all, by the way, taken from various research, including Munson, Matson, and Hayes, Gilpin, and Neitzel, as you see there on top. How does this relate to the Fremont then? Again, the significance of color. If we look at various examples, it's difficult to know, again, whether color was significant to the Fremont. I'd love to be able to interview them and find out. But if we look at some archaeological examples, we can assume that color was ritually meaningful in some way. At least that's the assumption I make. These colors may have, again, been associated with ritual or cosmology, direction, concepts of place. There's little evidence of this, but again, we can make some assumptions and try and look at some hypotheses as to why this might be the case. In terms of actual archaeological evidence, we do see use of black, obviously, white and red in the pottery and rock art. We also see some yellows and oranges, and then what I call kind of a splash of blue and green. And I'll give you a couple examples. So here's some rock art. This is up in the Muddy Creek area of central Utah. Some red paint along with some white, so kind of a dichromatic format. If we look at figurines and some of the pottery as well as gaming pieces, you can see some of these vibrant reds and oranges. I kind of think a lot of the color gets lost over time, and it would be amazing to see these artifacts during their time period and to see how brilliant they would have been. But this figurine from 9 Mile Canyon gives us a feel for the brilliance of the color of some of these artifacts. And then the splash of blue and green we can see in the pendants, in the turquoise. These are from Baker Village, the Baker Village site and the Five Finger Ridge site. And if you think back to those Pillings figurines I was showing you, these are examples of some of those ornaments that were worn around the neck and around the waist that are depicted in those figurines. And then one of my favorite examples of red among the Fremont is this red shafted flicker feather headdress. Say that fast 5 times. It's just beautiful colors shown on this headdress with just right in the middle, a couple yellow shafted flicker feathers, which aren't native to this region, are actually found in the Midwest and the East Coast. That's a whole nother research project. But just some power of color among the Fremont. Again, we assume it had some meaning of some kind. So to wrap up kind of my last hypothesis was the notion of red on gray pottery representing some kind of group membership or social identity. Now this slide, you're going to wonder, why am I showing you a Scottish tartan? Well, I want to give you an example of the notion of what social identity could mean. And Linda Cordell gave a great quote about this. She said, social identity refers to the way people identify themselves in relation to their membership in diverse social groups. So examples could be kin groups or clans, so Scottish clans. For me, it's the Campbell clan of Scotland. Socioeconomic status, age, religion, all of these are elements of social identity. Now, these can be represented in active and passive ways. So active expressions of identity would be deliberate, public symbols of your membership or identity. So this could be, as I'm showing here, something that you wear, like a kilt or a crest, maybe a headdress. But then there's also passive examples of expressions of identity that are inconspicuous, that may be part of the way you speak, or your mannerisms, your dialects, slang. These often are not as easily manipulated as the active examples, because they're kind of habitual, the way we do things, but we don't always know that we're doing them. So is red on gray pottery potentially almost an active display of group membership? Well, possibly. If we look at research that an archaeologist, a very famous archaeologist, conducted in Africa, Ian Hodder had a couple things to say about pottery in terms of group membership. He said, quote, "If pots are used to form group membership, it is clear that the pots must be visibly different from group to group," which I think we're seeing with this red on gray example. They're very different from these black on gray painted bowls. He also said that, quote, "Types of pottery which are used as symbolic markers of group identity form distinct spatial patterns and leave a distinctive and recognizable trace in the archaeological record." Again, we see this difference spatially in where we're finding red on gray pottery versus the distribution of black on gray and black on white pottery. So how does this relate to the Fremont? In terms of ceramic vessels, they transcend their utilitarian purpose and can be used as both active and passive forms of social identity. They can signal membership in terms of their design and paint color and form, but also passively, they can be seen in terms of the raw material choice, or the coiling techniques used to make and smooth, or the methods of manufacture, or the sequence of construction to make these pottery. These are habitual practices that are handed down from generation to generation, and people tend to do them without knowing it, because they've just learned through muscle memory or habitus how to make their pots. And so it's less easily manipulated, as opposed to active expressions of identity seen through design and form and paint. So is red on gray possibly signaling some kind of group affiliation? Possibly. And again, it's hard to prove, but it's a theory. It could be both overt and active expressions, in the kind of dramatic differences we're seeing in the form and color, but it's also not widely traded. So it's staying really tightly concentrated. It's also possibly produced differently, made differently, so innovatively in some cases, through potential oxidizing, which is in contrast to the reduction manufacturing process made by most all other Fremont pottery. Is it an intentional divergence from social structures? Possibly. It's possibly trying to break away from these traditions of painted pottery found in the South. So to conclude for today, a couple of thoughts. Red on gray pottery could be reinforcing some kind of social boundary along these border areas between that northern and the central and southern macro regions, which I showed you on the maps, specifically in relation to the south end of Utah Lake. And it could have been used as some way to overtly display group identity. And this could be in part to mitigate competition for resources. If we look at Utah Lake in terms of its resource value, it was bountiful. The fish, the wetland resources, it was a place of the people traveled through from north to south and acquired a lot of resources. And so this could have potentially been a marker, a way to show a boundary of this is our region. Again, just a theory. But finally, it may exemplify some kind of pattern of integration within the larger Fremont archaeological culture. It was used to maintain identity, but also to manage differences between groups in those macro regions. It's a unique pottery. It has a lot, I think, to tell us, and we have a lot more to learn. But I'm grateful for you all listening today and hearing what I had to say about red on gray pottery. I want to wrap up just by offering my thanks to Crow Canyon and Taylor specifically, but also my research colleagues, Joseph Bryce and Talia Gluch, and the landowners that were involved with these projects, the Wolf family, the Hinckley family, and then also the Department of Anthropology, and then the Museum of Peoples and Cultures and the Natural History Museum of Utah. That's it for me. So I will stop sharing my screen.
That was fantastic, Scott. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah.
We've got lots of questions.
All right.
I am going to steal the first question though. And I just kind of wanted to return to kind of thinking about these kind of, different recipes that are used to produce, pots,
Yeah.
how they could be produced differently, kind of getting into the communities of practice kind of theory. Is there
Yeah.
anything about these recipes that you think that are kind of like these hidden attributes, right? That only people in the know, quote unquote, could
Yeah.
reproduce. They couldn't just see it from the outside. You'd have to know the specific technique. Is there
Yes.
anything like that that you can hypothesize? Any pigment type, or do you have any ideas around that?
I wish, specific to the red on gray, there isn't a special recipe in terms of the temper. It's very, like I said, it's part of that Great Salt Lake temper type, which involves just a shotgun of aplastic inclusions. We are looking at the chemistry of the paint and looking at possible sources up here in the north, but whether it's different from other sources elsewhere, we just don't know. But as of now, we're not really familiar or have seen any like specific recipe to the red on gray other than that temper type, which is defined as specific to northern Utah. Yeah.
So we have lots of questions
Yeah.
surrounding kind of just general like production.
Okay.
I'm just going to go through them. Well, one person said, these the beautiful designs on pottery appear to have been painted on. Have any of the brushes that they have like used, have they ever been found, or do we know much about brushes?
That's a good question. I don't know about among the Fremont. I know and they've that oh, I don't know if I can think of any examples, but ethnographically, we have accounts of brushes made from human hair specifically, and then like yucca fibers. One of the undergrad students involved with this project actually did some experimental archaeology and created her own brushes and actually painted some red on sherds to see which techniques work the best. And she found that human hair was the best type of brush technique. So yeah, ethnographically, we have examples of that. I don't know about prehistorically, if we know of any. Maybe in the Puebloan world, there are some examples, but I'm not aware of any in the Fremont world. So
One of the things that I just recently learned, gosh, this was just weeks ago that I learned this was I guess in the 60s, people thought that the brushes were just chewed up twigs. That
ah,
no one else had like, other ways of making a brush. And I kind of like it kind of blew my mind. I was like, really? Just that long ago? We just thought people
yeah.
were chewing on twigs. But anyway,
No,
um,
these were like likely finely crafted, instruments for sure.
right.
And I've seen, I worked with a potter down in the Casas Grandes area in northern Mexico, who showed me how he paints with human hair, and it's very different from like the stiff bristles that we see on modern paintbrushes today. They're very loose and they're fold across the surface, and they create these beautiful, consistent lines.
Yeah.
It's
It's
amazing.
like pinstriping a car, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really cool.
It's beautiful.
Um, we have another question here. It's a pretty interesting question. Is how do you know that these aren't just like this isn't just like one specific individual making these pots? What's the kind of time depth we're talking about? Just to kind of remind the
Oh,
audience.
and that's a great question. It does span, well, it's late Fremont. Most of these are found at late Fremont sites, so spanning, a couple hundred years. And it's spread across multiple sites as well. So I mean, yes, it could be a single individual, but more than likely it's multiple people, given the distribution, the spatial distribution, and time that we find the pottery.
Right. So we got lots of questions around kind of the actual red color itself, the
Okay.
pigment, or is it mineral, or how is it being
Yeah.
used? And one of the other things I was wondering is, could you explain to folks kind of the reduction environment that you're talking about,
Yeah.
kind of what happens in this environment?
Sure. Yeah. So the paint again, Talia, the undergrad student involved in this project, she actually went out and found various, she worked with a geology professor here at BYU to find various sources for this paint. And it turns out it's likely hematite of some kind. So this is just a kind of a soft mineral that's heavily, iron rich, very red, very soft, can be pounded into a paste and mixed with water and other binders like an animal fat to create a paint. And here in Utah Valley, I think she found 4 or 5 different kind of colors of this hematite, varying in ranges of red, almost to even a yellow in some cases. But yeah, it's a mineral that's found naturally along. She was finding it along like streams and riverbeds, areas like that. The other question was, oh, the reduction environment. So a reduced environment is basically digging a hole and putting hot coals down in the bottom of that hole, and then putting your pots in on top of the coals, and then burying your pottery to fire and harden that pottery. What happens is that reduces the oxygen in the atmosphere that under the ground, and so any of the iron that's in the clay doesn't oxidize and turn red. It remains a really kind of beautiful gray, if you want to call it that. And it's this really nice light color gray. In contrast to that, an oxidized environment is when pots are actually fired on an open fire, and they are exposed to oxygen, which oxidizes the clays and makes it that red. And like I was mentioning in the presentation, almost all Fremont pottery is gray. And that is like the definition of Fremont pottery, is that gray color. And that's why these red on tan or buff, dare I say, is really unique and different, and suggests that perhaps they were firing these red on gray pots in a totally different way than what has traditionally been done among all the other pots. Did I cover everything? I can't remember.
Yeah, that was great. That was really good.
Hey,
The
hey.
we lots of people just so interested in the general how these things are constructed, and
Yeah,
one person said, this the on the bowls, they look so symmetrical. Could they
yeah.
be using a pottery wheel?
No, yeah, there's no wheel involved. These are all made by hand. You're coiled and then scraped. Yeah, but they're works of art. And I've even tried on my computer to create the symmetries, using like Adobe Illustrator. It's hard to do with a computer. The skill to create these symmetries, the mirrorings and the rotational symmetries, let alone the consistency of the diameters of these bowls, it's incredible. It's astounding. And we think that there was some kind of mental template, if not a physical template, maybe a basket of some kind to help maintain that consistency. But they're also interesting because they often nest just enough to be transported, which is perfect for trade.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, some people have questions about kind of is there has there been any work done on if the red on gray pottery is at a different time, made at a different time than the black on gray pottery? Is there complete overlap or what's that like?
The time frames are pretty consistent. We're looking at around it's late Fremont time period, around 1000 to 1100 AD for the most part. Uh, there's probably some give or take on that, but it's for the most part this late Fremont time period. Yeah.
So are there any pigment sources for like the actual black color?
That's a Katie question. I'm not exactly sure where the sources are for the black pigment itself. They're both organic and mineral. I do know that, but I don't know the exact sources for those. That's a good question.
Okay. Um, One final kind of question around just basic kind of pottery kind of lingo. What does temper mean?
Good. Okay. Temper is basically the material that's added to the clay. So it's typically crushed rock or even other sherds, which is called grog, which is applied to the clay to help keep it from cracking and breaking during the firing process. And it is composed of all of the kind of minerals that you find in the natural rock. And with Fremont pottery, that's how we actually identify the different types is by the minerals that are found in that crushed temper. So the Snake Valley black on gray has a very specific kind of mineral composition. If we compare it to the Great Salt Lake pottery, that's how we can see the differences that those minerals are very different based on that crushed rock that's used as this tempering agent to keep your pottery from just exploding when you fire it.
That was great. That was awesome.
Okay.
Um, so we want to be super respectful of your time. We're going to end it here.
Oh, okay.
Scott, this was really great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Yeah. Glad to do it.
Yeah. And we hope you all have a really great week. And then remember, no webinar next week because it's the SAAs. The following week we'll return. Thanks again, Scott.
Oh, you're welcome.